Aikwe, Neknao Melita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be talking about my top 10 books of 2020. So the first 7 are not going to be in any particular order. They're just kind of how I grabbed them. My top 3 though, are in a particular order for me. The first is Winter Counts by David Heska Wanbli-Weiden. I've talked about this recently. I do have a review up. This one in particular, I just really enjoyed how much I was able to relate to this book in so many different ways, what I connected to, and the story overall. If you don't know, the story follows Virgil Wounded Horse, who is Lakota and is on the Rosebud Reservation. He's kind of the vigilante of the reservation. So when justice isn't served by the tribal police or by the FBI, Virgil's the one to call and issue justice / a beating, whoever deserves it. And when he is asked to find out how hard drugs are getting onto the reservation, he doesn't really want anything to do with it. He feels that it was an eventuality, doesn't want to get into it, but it turns personal when his nephew ends up overdosing on some of these hard drugs, and Virgil is determined to find out who is bringing them onto the reservation and to stop them. So like I said, there was like a bunch of stuff that I was able to relate to in terms of jurisdictional processes, as well as just Virgil's kind of mindset, I talk about it more in my review, so if you really want to know more, please go check that out. This next one I'm actually kind of surprised that I enjoyed, and that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I say I'm surprised that I enjoyed it mostly because I am not a horror fan. This year was like the first time I've delved into the horror genre in terms of reading. I do not watch scary movies. Ultimately, everything tends to freak me out. I am chicken shit when it comes to horror movies of any kind, so I thought it would be similar with horror books. However, maybe it's because it's an indigenous horror that I actually really enjoyed this. Yes, it was freaky, but it was in a way that I could handle in a way. Like, I think it definitely amplified the fact that my partner was out hunting when I started this. I do not suggest that, but it was ultimately really dynamic. I did tap it up a little bit. The book follows 4 Blackfeet men who end up going hunting for elk. It's the last day of the season and they're desperate to fill their freezers, so they end up going onto land that they're not supposed to be hunting on, and they kill unethically. So years later, the spirit of the elkhead woman wants her revenge, and she gets it by hunting them back. And in some ways it's really quick and easy, and then in others it's very psychological. What ended up surprising me most was that I ended up rooting for elkhead woman. I was hoping that she would get her revenge, mostly because we do get her perspective. We do end up understanding why she's doing what she's doing. And also what surprised me was someone that I didn't expect to have a big part in here having a huge impact towards the end of the book. So that I very much appreciated. This is another one I have a review up on my channel. Please check it out for more details. The next one is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. This is essentially a mermaid book, but these mer creatures are descendants of the slaves that were thrown overboard during the transatlantic slave trade. And they have this, basically there's one in their community that ends up holding all the information, all the history of their kind. And I think once a year or once every couple of years, I read this back in like early summer, so I'm trying to remember. I think it's once a year or once every couple of years. There's a ceremony that they do in order to remember their past, to remember who they are and what they're like, why they're still living. So the person who does hold all the knowledge is Yetu, a young female who feels the pain of these memories, and she's having a hard time adapting to remembering everything, and she feels like she's struggling alone because no one else remembers these. So when it comes to her time to give the memories back to the people, she doesn't want to take them back. And so she leaves. And as small as this book is, it took me, I believe, a couple of days to get through, just because it had a huge impact. There were chapters where I just had to set this book down and think on it. This has a great discussion on generational trauma, on like the fluidity of sex and gender. It was just, I don't know, I loved it. It had a huge impact. Just everything. I really enjoyed this. Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. I actually listened to this via an audiobook through my library, and then immediately as soon as I finished it, and I finished it all in one sitting, bought the physical copy. This is a book written in verse about a young boy who ends up, his older brother Sean ends up getting shot. And the first thing Will can think of is the 3 rules. Don't cry, don't snitch, and revenge. So the day after his brother is shot and killed, he gets his brother's gun and starts heading down the elevator. It's the longest elevator ride, as each floor has a visitor for Will. This was really intense, and I absolutely love the author's interview at the end. I don't know if that's necessarily in this. It doesn't look like it, because basically it's a note on the recurrence of these rules of don't cry, don't snitch, and revenge, of just the cycle that kids end up getting into, particularly like gangs and other nonsense, and these like trivial conflicts that ultimately started from something so minor and end up affecting these kids' lives in a huge way. So that I thought was important. I also, the main focus I believe on this is just letting yourself mourn, as opposed to trying to find blame or trying to set blame or like trying to do something. Sometimes you just need to cry. And that was really impactful. Akata Witch by Nnedi Okorafor. This one follows Sunny Nwazwe, who was born in America, but then her and her family moved to Nigeria, where her family's originally from. Basically, their parents think that it's better for them to live in Nigeria. The problem with this is that Sunny is albino, and she also has an American accent, so she gets picked on a lot and bullied. When she starts making a couple friends, she realizes why. She has powers that no one else has, and these friends start to help her realize that she is a leopard person, someone with magical abilities. Someone is killing children for a sinister plot. It's up to Sunny and her friends to stop them. I thought this was a really interesting book. I really enjoyed the magical aspect mixed with West African folklore. It was just really fun and dynamic. It was another one that I listened to via the audiobook through my library and then immediately bought a copy. And the same with Akata Warrior. I thought Akata Witch was stronger. Now don't get me wrong, Akata Warrior is still good. I just feel like Akata Witch was a little stronger, and that's why it's on here. I just really appreciated, like, it's fun, but it's gritty. It was just really fun. It was a really fun read. 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. This one actually surprised me a bit too. I wasn't having the best of luck with thrillers, honestly, and was kind of not really expecting much from this, but again, this was another one that I listened to from my library. And basically, yeah, as soon as it got to a certain point, I'm like, I need this physically. This was really fun in terms of, it wasn't quite what I was expecting. It was exciting. I think it's also a book about books, so that was also nice. But it also reminded me of a friend, the narration. I don't know if it was necessarily the person who ended up narrating the audiobook or just the guy in general, the protagonist. We follow Malcolm Kershaw, who years ago ended up putting out a 8 Perfect Murder list based off of murder mystery books. Now he is co-owner of a bookshop that specializes in murder mysteries. though he doesn't necessarily read them much anymore himself. But the FBI comes a knocking asking for his advice because they believe that someone is committing murders based off of his list and they need his help. So that it was an interesting premise, and ultimately really enjoyed it, and it didn't end up going at all like I had expected throughout the whole book. There, like, any guess that I made, it went a completely different way, and it was really kind of appreciative because I feel like some thrillers are just easy to like figure out. So yeah, I really appreciated that, and it was a pretty quick read, and it was still impactful, and it's still one that I keep thinking about. The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I read this towards the beginning of the year, and this was one I believe I bought the book but also managed to get the audiobook because this is another one written in verse, and that's one thing that I found with particularly Elizabeth Acevedo's work is to listen to the book as I'm reading it, just so that I can, specifically with verse in general, it's just nice to know how the author intended it to be read. I think it has a bigger impact that way, but it's also just fun to follow along, I feel like. With this one, we follow Xiomara, who is Dominican and living in the U.S. Her family is like devoted, I think, Catholics or Christians. It just says church. And Xiomara has questions that she wants answered. She feels like her voice isn't being heard. She wants to ask questions, but it's not easy to get answers from her mom or her dad. And then when questioning the church, they just want her to be quiet and calm and like a good girl. People she has a lot to say, so she ends up she has a journal where she writes down all of her poetry. So when she's invited to a slam poetry club at her school, she feels that this may be a new way to let her voice be heard. So this one was tense and at times because I felt like at any moment Xiomara could get in trouble, and that like freaks me out in books, I find. And she did a couple times, but like ultimately it just made me want to take care of her. Xiomara was just, oh my god, I just wanted to answer all of her questions. I feel like this is a really important book in general, just because some don't have the privilege of having open communication with a family member to be able to understand what their body is going through, particularly during puberty, particularly a woman during puberty, and the options to be able to go, like the options to that you have. And that was like particularly devastating for me, just because I did have that privilege of being able to ask my mom anything or family friends. In fact, I had a whole ceremony based off me getting my period, so that it was like shocking to me that like I kind of understood it in a sense, but not fully. And I think this book really kind of opened my eyes to it. Like I said, I listened to this book while I read it, and at the time we were still face to face. We hadn't gone into quarantine yet, so I read this at work, and that was a bad idea because I started crying at my desk. So, but yeah, this one really stuck with me, and I think it's Elizabeth Acevedo's one of her most powerful works. Alright, we're at my top 3. So these ones in particular are at my top for a reason, and they're organized in a specific way. So I'm still debating for second place, really, but I think ultimately for the first one, it's going to be Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I read a lot of Rebecca Roanhorse this year, or for 2020, but this one in particular, this is an arc that was given to me, and I was super excited. I still need to get my hands on a finished copy. I loved it so much, but this one is Rebecca Roanhorse's venture into adult fantasy, and particularly high fantasy based off of pre-colonial Americas, which is fantastic. We don't see a whole lot of that. Most high fantasies are based off Western Europe. So that in itself was amazing. This book in general was just so fun. So basically, the winter solstice is coming up, and on the winter solstice is supposed to be a solar eclipse, a really rare event. And there's schemes and political intrigue and to try to ultimately overthrow what a priesthood that has kind of taken over some clans in a particular area of this world. So we get multiple perspectives. There's LGBTQ rep. There was so much into this book, and it was a book that had me like on the edge of my seat and keep going. Yeah, there was like with any and all of these are going to be slight problems with these, but ultimately I completely was completely happy to overlook those. And also, I think my only problem right now that I'm having a struggle with is waiting for the next in this series. So this is another one I have a full review of on my channel, so please check that out. This next one I actually just recently talked about in my December wrap-up, and I just finished it in the nick of time. Technically, I went over midnight on into January 1st. However, I don't consider it the next day until I go to sleep. So I stayed up way later than I ever intended to be sure that I could count this in my as my last book of 2020, and I was happy to do so. I was super excited about it, and that is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. There is so much I want to talk about this book. I haven't done a full review of this. This is supposed to be a trilogy. I feel like ultimately I want to get more into N.K. Jemisin and just kind of delve into their work. This one in particular, so that's one thing I'm realizing is that the later we go into 2020, the more I tab up books that I really enjoyed. And this one in particular, oh my god. So basically with this, it's fantasy and it's a bit of sci-fi. Every great city has a soul. Some are as ancient as myths, and others are as new and destructive as children. In New York City, she's got 6. So, and that's basically each city has a persona. If you've been to cities, or if even like small towns, I feel like have their own persona. But in this one in particular, New York City has an avatar that has their persona. So there's a person with the persona of New York City. Something's trying to kill New York City. It's come to the point where New York City is so big that it's a birth of sorts, and something's trying to stop it. So we get to meet New York City for our brief moment, but ultimately who we do meet and who we do spend a lot of time with are New York City's boroughs. So because New York City is so big and has such a cluster of diversity and culture, each borough has its own personality and culture, we learn more about each borough and each borough's avatar and personality. So like the Bronx is a art director at a gallery. She's Native American, she's lesbian, and she's badass and doesn't take shit from anybody and wants to do her own thing. Brooklyn is black and is on city council, and she owns her own brownstones, and she used to be a rapper. And like all these boroughs we get to know through a person, and it's just really exciting. And the whole book is about them coming together to fight a common evil that they have. So it's really entertaining and really fun. What I appreciate about N.K. Jemisin's writing, particularly in this book, this is the first N.K. Jemisin that I've read. Hopefully that'll change soon. But ultimately what I really appreciate about their writing, because as I started this book, I saw that on their Twitter, they actually had a kind of thread where they talk about how they don't want it, like they're over subtlety in sci-fi. They're over like these subtle hints at racism or like representations of racism. They blatantly put racism in here. We know who's being racist, xenophobic, or homophobic, and they're not shy. So N.K. Jemisin's not shy about pointing out who's doing what. So that I really appreciate, just the blatancy of it. Also the representation in here, like there's indigenous woman in here that I absolutely love, that she's also LGBTQ+. I don't know, I've never been to New York City. I would be interested to hear anyone who does live in New York or who is like a New York native, to like whether you were born in New York or you were um, Lenape. I would like to hear from both perspectives. I'd like to just see how accurate this book is in terms of representing New York City and its boroughs, because, oh my god. There's been a couple of books that I've read that feature New York City that make me think, oh, if only I was like born in 1920s, even though that was a terrible time for Indigenous people or any person of color. In New York City, I could have seen New York City in its heyday. This is the first book that's making me go, maybe I do want to visit New York City at some point. So it was very interesting and dynamic, and I absolutely love this book. Okay, so if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that there's one book missing that I had called this early on in fall. And it still holds true, so I'm really excited about it. And that is A Lot's Away by Darcy Little Badger. By far my favorite book of 2020. Oh my god, this is a young adult, I want to say urban fantasy, but basically we follow A Lot's Away, or Ellie. Ellie is Lipan Apache. She's asexual, she's 17, and she can raise ghosts from the dead. It's her family trait of being Lipan Apache, and it's been inherited down from generation to generation, and Ellie is able to do that. When she ends up hearing that her cousin died in a car accident, she dreams about him that same night, where he explains that it wasn't a car accident. He didn't die how everyone is claiming he died. He was murdered, and he's asking Ellie to protect his family from harm and to figure out why he was murdered. So with the help of Ellie's friends and family, they go and protect his family and realize that there is something deceitful going on in the town. So it's really just a well balanced of like fantastic. There's like, because it's very much the world similar to ours. The only difference is that creatures of cultural lore, not just indigenous, but like everywhere, is alive. There are vampires, there are fairies, there are other things that I won't mention because I don't want to call them upon me. There is just a diversity of cultural creatures of legend that are in this book or mentioned in this book in some way. And what I very much appreciate about this book is that despite that slight difference, Darcy Little Badger goes into how that affects indigenous creatures of lore, of how colonization has affected them, how it's depleting them, and how it affects certain creatures in certain places. There were multiple aspects of this book that I'm like, this is fantastic. Wasn't sure what I was getting to when I started reading this book. I just was so happy when I was, and certain things got discussed, and I was just like, oh my god, this is perfect. Yeah. And of course there's like a dog ghost in here that is Ellie's companion, and he's absolutely adorable. So there's like ghosts, there's vampires, there's fairies, it was just that, and the description of everything was fantastic. Of course, with all books, there's like some little things here and there. This does read like a middle grade. It is YA though. I love Ravina Kai's illustrations on the cover. I think every chapter has a chapter header illustration. The hardcover naked cover has illustrations and designs. It is fantastic. One thing I have to critique about it though is that I don't think it helps in terms of thinking it's not middle grade. I also think that just though the illustrations are gorgeous, I personally just think that it kind of made it look more like a middle grade and made me think it was set in winter when in fact this was set in summer. But I am more than happy to overlook all of that because of how perfect this book was. So yeah, this is all-time favorite book of 2020. It also is just one of my favorite books of all time. So yeah, if you haven't picked it up, I highly suggest you do. So those are my top 10 books of 2020. Let me know if you read any of them down in the description or down in the comments below, or let me know what book has what books have been your favorite in 2020. If you want to talk to me on any other platform, I am on a variety of other social medias: Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, and now Storygram. I will have raise awareness links and descriptions down in my raise awareness section down below as well. Please take a look, get informed, research, share, and donate where you can. I'd very much appreciate it. Otherwise, I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading, and I will talk to you again soon. Cheers!